You've got big projects to tackle, but your day gets swallowed up by repetitive tasks and constant inquiries. It's hard to make progress when you're stuck putting out fires. That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. Acting like an extra set of hands, you get your time back for the high-impact projects. Ready to reclaim your time? Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
Welcome everyone to this super special live episode at EdTech Week in New York City. If you're kind of following the calendar here, this is day 2 of 3 days of awesome programming going on. I've attended some great sessions so far and excited just for some networking tonight and other cool stuff, but always like the opportunity to record with people in person while I'm here. So we are here with Kevin Harrington from Rize Education. It's a company that I've known about for a while and excited to kind of just learn a little bit more myself, but also have you kind of help uplift the cool work that you and your team are doing there. So as we always do, if you want to introduce yourself briefly, kind of get an overview of your professional background, and then we'll get onto what Rize is up to these days.
Perfect. Yeah, Dustin, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. My personal professional background really started coming out of college at the Blackstone Group here in New York. Worked in real estate, private equity for a number of years, but eventually realized that I just wasn't finding the sort of fulfillment I was looking for out of my career in that career trajectory, and so sort of reassessed and realized that education, specifically higher education, was really where I was going to want to spend my time on a day-to-day basis for hopefully decades to come. And my co-founder and I realized we wanted to start a company and build a team that we really cared about and towards something we deeply believed in. When we're lucky enough to meet President Jeff Docking of Adrian College, a small liberal arts college in rural southeast Michigan, who convinced us back in 2019 to leave New York, move to campus, and we really built Rize there, kind of working down the hall from him, living on campus and learning what these sort of smaller regional colleges were all about.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting sort of genesis. So we'll keep following that thread because obviously that is the origin story of Rize Education. So I guess going in now, looking back and everything, how strong of a vision, I guess, did you have at that time of okay, you're there on campus with this professor, this mentor and everything, what Rize is now? How much of oh man, there was that kernel there, or what we could never have expected where Rize is now. So I guess kind of segues that way so folks can better understand what Rize Education is.
Yeah, kernel is probably a good and apt description, I'd say. I think in many ways, I don't think we've ever really wavered on our core vision for where the long tail of higher education institutions need to move. This is not the Ivy League, this is not the public flagships, these are your smaller regional colleges, particularly four-year colleges across the country. Those high-level themes of needing to lower costs, which means getting more creative in your academic programming and the format of the academic programming, which will allow you to expand into the rapidly evolving, high-demand fields across business, tech, and healthcare that students and employers are both demanding, all while preserving that 4-year formative experience we believe so strongly in to this day. those themes have never really changed. What has changed is basically every single detail of how we go about that along the way. And I think one of the best decisions we made, as much out of necessity as anything else, is moving to campus to just work alongside administrators, faculty, hear directly from students, because you might think, in abstraction, you have a good sense of what colleges actually want, how the incentives work, how things work day to day. But until you're really there in the weeds with them, I think it's hard to truly grasp the reality that they are facing on a day-to-day basis. And so we got to work on really formatting what an academic program for higher education can look like by bringing in even just a small number of online classes that are shared across colleges to allow these smaller schools to sort of replicate the kind of breadth and career orientation and industry connections and really balance sheet that only the big public flagships have been able to realize up to this point.
Yeah, and I think just to call out one point, because I think it's especially salient, in this sort of space to be like, that sort of like, if it's for us, do it with us and all that kind of thing, that sort of collaborative and kind of user input in sort of the design process for anything. Like, a lot of that happens and should be happening more with students, but it's like, let's not forget the faculty and all that, all these other stakeholders that exist in any institution like that. I think it's just very refreshing, I think, to see sort of a manifestation of that in sort of what you're all doing and everything. And I think that idea of like, to me, and I guess as kind of as a brief follow-up, there's sort of a chronic issue in higher ed around like transfer credits and those sort of things. Like, and it's almost like I feel like you're like getting above the phrase. Like, we're not going to play that game. We're going to play this game where it's like, if you trust that institution or their pedigree or something, like the idea of just being more collaborative, because I guess like it's the idea that traditionally transfer credits would just be that like, I'm just showing you the receipt of what I did at some other school, and you kind of have to like discern, like, is it equal to something we have here or not, whatever. But it's like, they don't have to worry about the whole kind of fiasco of like transfer credits, and then even the institutions.
We definitely see students choosing to transfer into our partner institutions for our programs. And so it makes that road into that institution a bit simpler and really just helps our institution serve that student who loves their campus, loves the community, maybe wants to play on the football team, wants to be closer to home than they realize, wants to keep that job they had in high school to kind of pay for their education, but it also allows them to study the subject that they know they want, their parents think they want. That ultimately leads to great jobs, given we know how important what you major in is to that job. I think the broader transformation we're trying to move these schools to, which ultimately benefits students, is allowing them to do exactly that, like build out their core traditional undergrad and hopefully soon graduate non-traditional offerings in a way that helps them better serve their community, meet employers where they are, because that their needs are evolving more rapidly by the day, and to expect a college to hire full-time people, take a bet on investing new curriculum and all that goes into that every time a new field like AI emerges with increasing regularity is just unrealistic. To your point, by merging the students together into these shared classes, knowing that each student gets credit at their own college for that class, it allows these small schools to amortize the cost of starting a new AI degree across 5, 10, 100, 500 of them even.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing too, because it makes me think of like, because I think in these spaces, people talk about sort of the, EdTech trends and everything, and the idea of like the promise of like MOOCs or something. Like, it makes me think of something like that too. I think in just the idea of so many different things that have tried to address things like this, but have not really gotten, kind of hit the target right on or anything. So I think it's that idea of, if you could have a great faculty member teaching a course and, they have a history of teaching it, that sort of thing, like students just getting access to that like high quality education. Yeah. And then like you said, like it's just, there's so many, I guess, like boxes that are being checked kind of thing, which is why I'm just like, I really appreciate what you're doing. It feels like a very like smart way to go about this, of just sort of,
thank you.
Yeah, but the idea of like, bringing the students together so they're collaborating. I think that's something that anybody would say is like, a very high impact practice, and then, it serves, the institution as well. So I think it, all that to be said, obviously this is like complex work and everything else. So I imagine maybe like, coming to a space like this, it is like such a great kind of collaborative, kind of think tank, and just sort of, hearing what other people are doing. And what brought you here? Like, what has been some exciting or enjoyable parts that you've had? I mean, obviously we're like midway through day 2, so still more to come. But just like, what brought you to EdTech Week, and what's been so good for you so far?
Thankfully, we are based out of New York, so I can just walk over, which is definitely part of the calculus. Really, my co-founder moderated a Shark Tank panel, which I think is just always fun. I remember when we were in those early years of our journey, which aren't too long ago, but kind of feel long ago, and just seeing that excitement, that energy. Is really, really cool. Otherwise, I think it's really just the people. I mean, that's ultimately why we're all here. There's amazing sessions, amazing content, amazing things, but the thing that you just can't replicate in your day-to-day in any other way outside of an event like this is both the just generative creativity, the ideas, the potential partnerships, potential people to join our company, potential investors. If we're going to be successful in accomplishing the mission we've set out to accomplish, it's going to be about the people that we sort of invite into that mission, who agree to participate in it. And this is one of the best ways I can think of finding those people, regardless of what role they end up playing for us.
Yeah, it really is that collective approach. I think it takes like perspectives from somebody who's like been investing and seeing like these journeys and roller coasters that people have gone on, or people who are like, oh, we're both kind of in like an early stage or mid stage, like startup or something, or certainly like institutions where it's like, again, that idea of like, I'm not going to just like build something that I think is great. It's like, I want you to sort of validate or sort of be involved in that process maybe, or certainly just trying to like spread the word and bring more awareness, because I assume for what you do, the more the merrier to an extent, because like the idea of like sharing kind of academic content and everything, like just that idea that like certainly some institutions, like you said, if they are a bigger one, they're going to have more to offer than the ones that are smaller and everything. So I think it's just like really trying to kind of broaden that impact. And
the more institutions, students, et cetera, that we welcome into this ecosystem, this platform we're building, the stronger that it gets. And as just 2 simple examples would be, first on the cost side, with every additional college that is pooling their students into the same shared classes, that class just became more affordable to operate, which means for all those colleges, the system is benefiting by that. The second one, though, is that there's just a lot of unique things you can do on the student experience side and the marketability side when you've got some amount of scale that is really hard for any smaller school to ever reach. University of Michigan can go partner with Google on computer science curriculum because of the scale they bring. Adrian College cannot, but through our partnership and the ecosystem we brought together through that collaboration, you can actually go approach these employers to make sure that the curriculum, as one example, is just really connected to what the market needs to benefit students ultimately. And so it's absolutely consistent with your point around we're a lot stronger together than we are sort of as these isolated entities.
Yeah, and I was in many like think tanks, and because I think Shark Tanks and think tanks are emblematic of the EdTech Week experience, but they were really focusing, which I've appreciated for a long time, that sort of like network approach, that idea that like institutions collaborating, working together, whether they're in the same region, the same type of institution, or have a particular shared like academic focus or something. It is just really incredible seeing the results of groups like that permeating more. Like it's seems very kind of implicit to the work that you're doing, is that like you don't. Which again is sort of just the weird sort of like juxtaposition, is that like there's so many spaces like this where higher ed leaders are collaborating and showing their work and doing all that, but then like there's still so much to be done on this sort of front of like, I will actually share your academic content and like reduce costs and those sort of things. So even in your sort of time, I guess, trying to bridge these gaps and everything, like, do you feel like there's been kind of like a paradigm shift, like just more of an openness to this sort of thing?
For a lot of reasons, there has been, for sure. And even over our sort of 5-year trajectory, we've seen it change pretty dramatically. I mean, sharing academic programming 6 years ago, pre-COVID, was pretty heretical even, as much as on paper it sort of made sense to everybody looking at the space from the outside. Once you get into the weeds of these institutions, to our earlier point, that reality sort of hits you in the face and you realize, oh, there's a lot of incentives that make this hard, a lot of just structural problems that make this hard. But over the past 5 years, mostly just because of the headwinds hitting the higher ed space, at least specifically where we work, we've seen more presidents, more faculty, more deans grapple with that reality that the only way out of this, the only way to emerge from these demographic shifts, not just surviving but thriving is to collaborate across institutions, and that technology is not just a foe. We can actually use it to really sustain and bolster and even expand our mission in a way that's consistent with that mission and not sort of threatening to it. And so, these headwinds can be really painful, but they're also the sort of accelerant to, I think, much needed and much long awaited innovation that will make the system as a whole a lot better for students in the long term.
This moment for higher ed is like just that flexibility, like the adaptability, the sort of nimbleness, that those are kind of, I think, going to be hallmarks of like higher ed strategy going forward. And if you can maybe like expand on this, because one thread of this that maybe like feels like it would be very exciting for like what you've built and what I think enables you to help institutions to better meet this moment is that idea of like the rapid sort of proliferation of like AI and the need for folks to just be knowledgeable about it, even if you're not in a technical field. Like, how's it going to impact like what you do and everything? So like, I guess even if there's sort of a brief anecdote or just sort of a reflection of that idea of like what you've built enables maybe those smaller institutions who earnestly are like, yeah, we get it. Like, this is like something that our students are demanding, and like we know we need to sort of accommodate like. What you're doing helps to enable those institutions to, something like AI feels like that's something that is like really exciting, where it's just like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I'm so glad we like started this a few years ago to try to like start moving the needle and then be able to sort of like really meet this moment now when everybody's like scrambling to try to build this sort of curriculum and everything.
If you just take our more rural schools, it's no fault of their own that they are fairly isolated from the ecosystems that we generally associate with innovation and AI and these new technological advancements. But it's important that they survive and thrive because they serve such a unique and important demographic who can't naturally be uplifted by some of these technological changes that are disrupting our society. And so, as two examples, when AI was pretty clear, probably a year and a half ago, that schools needed to have something in AI. You don't necessarily need a major or even sort of applied computing on a more technical thing, but just basic AI literacy was going to become increasingly important, and our schools had no answers for how to do that. Are you going to go hire an AI researcher from OpenAI? Like, good luck affording that. And so within 6 months, we were able to partner with one of the foremost researchers out of the University of Texas who worked with faculty from across our consortium to build a centralized curriculum that now stays up to date with the trends because of his and others' continual involvement in that curriculum, that now over 20 colleges very rapidly adopted in multiple formats, AI literacy certificate, AI literacy general education requirement, and so they're offering that to their students at a incredibly competitive, affordable price point, where it would have taken years otherwise. And I think as they see these new programs that have the benefit of scale, some amount of centralization on the curriculum side, advance really quickly and see how we can participate with employers constructively, how we can use these advances to help with grading turnarounds and reliability on student support. That now new innovative engine within these colleges is helping them think in sort of new ways and see, oh wow, that's a new possibility of how I in my classroom can take this new technology and actually use it to help myself and help my students in a way that without that sort of small encroachment into the campus, they wouldn't necessarily have that dynamism so vividly in front of them every day. So we are seeing a lot of benefits, especially for those more under-resourced schools in specific areas.
I think a lot about reform as sort of the kind of method to try to drive higher ed in towards the future, because it is that idea of hey, well, you have something like established courses and this sort of thing, we can sort of share that or sort of create this network and everything where it feels like there is that kernel of kind of a radical notion of doing this sort of thing that people wouldn't really have fathomed, however many years ago, but that it is not saying that well, institutions are doing it wrong, they need to be tear down and whatever else. It's I think if we just work better together and try to reform and rehab these sort of relationships and these notions that have been held on for a little too long and everything, it's just, again, I'll just use the word because sort of refreshing, because I think it's just there's so much value in these these institutions, these brands, and like you said, these sort of hubs in rural areas and everything, and the idea of with what you were kind of saying, for so many myriad of reasons, the student is in where they're at and might be an isolated institution just with limited resources, and that is what it is, and like you said, by no fault of their own. But trying to find ways that we can, through platforms like yours, bring like the best of both worlds. That idea is like you're living close to home, you can have that sort of residential experience of that community, but then also have access to high quality education on a number of topics and those sort of things. Like that's always like huge for me, because it feels like sometimes the conversation, I think we're starting to kind of move past this, but it's like, it's either like it's all online all the time, or it's like it's only residential. And that's even some leaders of institutions have, really kind of fully recoiled from like, obviously having to embrace fully online education during the pandemic and stuff. So I guess any reflections on that point to just sort of elaborate on it, that idea of like what you're doing can help try to enable sort of the best of both worlds, like for the student.
Best of both worlds is exactly what we aim for from day one. I think our initial thesis was that, especially Silicon Valley and the VC funding network, had this narrative back in sort of 2017 of, we have to go around these institutions. We can do it better. Boot camps, MOOCs, like they're all going to die. And it was largely bolstered by the quick math being done on sort of ROI. When you just bake in the cost you're putting into these colleges and the foregone wages and doing that against your wage premium, like that's not making sense. Where in reality, as long as you are studying the right subject in these schools and majoring in that subject, there really is not a student debt crisis, anything like what you hear in the news every day. And most of the student debt is actually coming out of graduate degrees, not at the undergraduate level. Furthermore, those ROI calculations I just think are a little bit shallow, and not realizing like, what do you really get out of that 4-year experience? You're probably making many of your best friends for life. You might even meet your future spouse. You're getting a credential that tells both your next employer and future employers, signals a lot of things that a quick skill set is not going to signal to them. A host of other reasons, 4 of the most fun years of your life. And so taking those things into account and realizing trying to replicate those things is really costly, really difficult, certainly cannot be done purely online, at least not with current technology. What we're aiming for is by utilizing some amount of shared online classes, the shared educational layer that cuts across all these in-person schools, you actually can sort of roll back the clock on the cost perspective to 1999, 2002, before anyone was worried about sort of the cost of higher education, while also simultaneously offering every single high demand subject in partnership with major employers that a student could possibly want, and therefore reinvigorate this same 4-year experience with a much, much higher ROI than what they can do today. And so that, as difficult and complicated as working with these institutions can be, it felt like a much surer, safer bet toward a world in 2030 where higher education is keeping up with the trends of the labor market and really fulfilling its mission from an ROI perspective for students.
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to be interesting to see how like the work that you're doing and others that hopefully can create just sort of this like what feels like such a stark contrast to like colleges of years past, where maybe they're able to put as much or maybe more emphasis on like their residential experience or the community they're building and other amenities and whatever else, and then that sort of like academic content like kind of being shared and whatever else, like 'cause it is that idea that you have to like I think anymore, like you just hear this sort of mantra, or at least I have that idea of like, kind of differentiation. Don't try to be like all things to all people as an institution. They like, somebody of those smaller institutions have gotten ahead of their skis where they like aspire to be like, this massive research one university. And it's like, at a certain point, it's like we've had enough of those. Like, it's fine. Like you can provide such a unique and valuable and relevant experience by acknowledging what is it that you may be able to do better than anybody else, or even just really fully embrace that idea of like, your local economy, your local community, and that sort of thing. So,
and to just bring it full circle on that point really quickly, it's very easy sitting here in New York to forget what is readily apparent to anyone in Adrian, Michigan, which is that entire town, all the people in that town, would suffer immensely, both culturally and financially, if that college goes under. It's probably the single most important cultural and financial economic center of that town. And when you multiply Adrian times 1,000 all over the country, you're talking about an enormous loss to sort of the civic life and economic life of this country if you lose these places. So just on that side, we also have sort of that obligation to try to do the best we can for these communities.
Yeah, because I feel like it's like another thing I sort of like was surmising is like, I think, as like the big institutions get bigger, that it's just like, it feels like this preconceived notion that like, it's just like, oh, they could probably take care of everybody, right? It's just like, nope, I don't think just like one institution is going to save all of us. Like, that's a pretty big
I certainly
mandate.
hope not, at least. That would be a very grim future of the world.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate the work that you're doing to try to, help, like you said, I mean, to support institutions in so many ways, which has so many other kind of really positive ripple effects. And I think it is just a important driver of kind of reform and innovation and impact and stuff for institutions all over the country. So, we'll have ways to connect with you and Rize in the description for the episode, but just appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit here.
So happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, Dustin.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.